Bienvenido a Oscuras Revelaciones. Este es el santuario oscuro, donde la luna es testigo de secretos inconfesables y verdades perturbadoras. Aquí se desvelan historias tan sombrías y desgarradoras que desafían cualquier límite humano. Cada relato que escucharás te sumergirá más profundamente en un mundo donde el horror se manifiesta sin restricciones, donde las verdades más crueles son reveladas bajo el amparo siniestro de la oscuridad eterna. Prepárate, porque una vez que empieces a escuchar, ya no habrá vuelta atrás. The whisper of decaying leaves beneath Elias's boots had been the forest's sole percussion until alien murmurs slithered through the air. Low, insistent frequencies jarring against the primeval calm. He went rigid, a sudden frost gripping his veins, the solitude he craved evaporating like mist. He stood on the precipice of an event that would warp his secluded communion with nature into a desperate scramble for existence. Elias had always orbited the periphery of human connection, finding truer kinship among ancient cedars and the fleeting movements of wildlife. A liberated week from the grind of routine was an irresistible summons to the Cascades, a pilgrimage into isolation. He dreamt of this for months, the simple geometry of his tent, the vast, untamed canvas stretching for miles, himself a solitary brushstroke within it. 2 days unfolded like a benediction. He trekked far from any semblance of a path, his camp a modest haven beside a creek whose ceaseless gurgle scored the silence. The air, sharp and immaculate, carried the resinous perfume of pine and the delicate sweetness of unseen blossoms. Evenings were spent beside a frugal fire, a flickering ember beneath a celestial tapestry undimmed by urban glare. The third dawn beckoned him higher. With essentials, water, sustenance, a compact medical kit stowed in a day pack, he left his main camp staked and ventured upward. The ascent, demanding and rugged, yielded vistas that stole the breath, valleys unfurling below in verdant splendor. It was late afternoon when the intrusion occurred. He'd paused on a moss-furred log, absorbing the forest symphony, when the discordant note struck his ear. Curiosity, that treacherous human impulse, tugged him forward. He moved with the stealth of a predator, weaving between arboreal sentinels and granite outcrops, the hushed, agitated dialogue clarifying as he advanced. 2 men, perhaps a third, their words clipped, laden with a tension that vibrated in the air. The meaning remained elusive, but the emotion was starkly legible. He reached the fringe of a small hollow. Peering from behind the gnarled trunk of an ancient oak, he saw them. 3 figures clad in somber hues clustered around a raw wound in the earth, a shallow, oblong pit. Ice flooded his circulation as one man wrestled a bulky, tarpaulin-shrouded form towards the opening. Recognition struck, brutal and undeniable, though his mind recoiled. Impossible. Not here. Not in this sanctuary. One, taller, bearing a livid scar that bisected his cheek like a fault line, appeared to command. His directives were sharp, guttural barks as the others wrestled the obscene parcel into the makeshift grave. Elias watched, transfixed, every primal instinct screaming retreat, yet his feet remained rooted. Then, a moment's lapse, born of sheer astonishment, he shifted his stance. A dry twig fractured beneath his boot, the snap echoing like a gunshot in the pregnant stillness. 3 heads pivoted as one, time stretched, taut and brittle. Then the scarred man, Corbin roared, "Grab him!" and the tableau shattered into pandemonium. Elias fled. He ran with a desperation he hadn't known he possessed, tearing through dense underbrush, vaulting over fallen giants, his lungs igniting, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Their pursuit was immediate, heavy footfalls and enraged shouts fueling his flight. He had no strategy, no destination, only the visceral need for distance. But this terrain was known to them too. Their relentless pace narrowed the gap. A gunshot cracked the air, the projectile whining past, pulverizing bark scant inches from his temple. He flinched, a reflex that cost him his balance on the treacherous slope. He tumbled down a steep embankment, a chaotic descent of whipping branches and bruising stones. He landed in a heap at the bottom, stunned, breath knocked from him. For a disoriented moment, he lay there, convinced this was the terminus. But their voices, nearer now, reignited the survival imperative. Ignoring the sharp protest in his ribs and the warm, slick path of blood tracing his cheek, he clawed his way upright and plunged onward. Dusk bled across the landscape, shadows lengthening, merging features into an indistinct gloaming. He exploited the fading light, weaving erratically between trees, doubling back where the cover allowed. His pursuers' calls ebbed and flowed. They were fanning out, attempting to ensnare him. Full night descended, dense and absolute. Panic had steered him far off any recognizable track. He was adrift in unfamiliar wilderness, hunted, bereft of supplies, utterly cut off. The weight of his predicament landed like a physical blow. Blind flight was suicide. He needed a plan. He forced himself still, spine pressed hard against the rough bark of a colossal fir, struggling to muffle his ragged gasps. As his vision adapted to the profound darkness, he scanned his surroundings. To his left, the ground fell away sharply. To his right, the hulking silhouette of a boulder cluster loomed. And ahead, was that the faint, mercurial shimmer of water? An idea sparked, desperate and perilous, yet the only ember of hope in the suffocating dark. Drawing a ragged breath, he moved again, now with intention, towards the glinting promise of the water. He navigated by sound and feel, each snapped twig, each rustle of leaf litter, amplifying into a thunderclap in his hyper-alert state. Driven by sheer will, he pressed forward. He emerged onto the bank of a swift, formidable river. Moonlight illuminated churning white water surging over submerged rocks. It was a treacherous passage, potentially lethal, but it represented his sole viable escape. He was poised to commit himself to the current when a voice sliced through the night air from behind. "Hold it right there." He turned. Corbin materialized from the tree line, weapon leveled unwaveringly at Elias's chest. The other two flanked him, their faces masks of fury and exertion. "End of the line," Corbin rasped, a cruel smirk twisting his scarred features. "Should have kept walking, friend." Elias raised his hands slowly, mind scrambling. Options exhausted, time evaporated. "Listen," he began, striving for a steady tone. "I don't know who you are. I didn't see anything clearly. Let me go. I swear, you'll never hear from me." Corbin emitted a short, bark-like laugh devoid of humor. "Points for trying, kid. Can't risk it, though. Strictly business." As Corbin's weapon lifted slightly, time seemed to decelerate. Elias saw the finger whiten on the trigger, the cold finality in the man's eyes. He chose. He flung himself backward, surrendering to the river. The glacial shock expelled the air from his lungs. For a terrifying instant, panic consumed him as the powerful current seized him, tumbling him end over end in its cold embrace. He fought desperately for the surface, gulping air amidst the maelstrom, swept violently downstream. Gunshots erupted, bullets stitching the water around him. But the river, tumultuous and indifferent, was now his shield, carrying him rapidly beyond their reach. He caught fragmented glimpses of his pursuers scrambling along the bank, their shouts receding into frustrated echoes. The subsequent passage, minutes, an hour, became a sensory blur. Roaring water, unseen impacts against rock, desperate gulps of air interspersed with mouthfuls of frigid river. He was battered, bruised, convinced each lungful might be his last. Eventually, the furious pace slackened. Summoning a final reserve of strength, he snagged a low-hanging branch, hauling his sodden, shivering form onto the muddy bank. He collapsed, coughing violently, too depleted to move. As the adrenaline subsided, the stark reality settled. Alive, yes, but lost, injured, pursued by killers, stripped of gear, food, direction. The night air bit through his soaked clothing, the threat of hypothermia a palpable presence. Yet, surrender wasn't an option. He had endured this far. He would see it through. When the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the eastern horizon, he forced himself upright. Every muscle screamed, a chorus of agony he refused to heed. Movement was imperative. He followed the river's course, reasoning it offered the best chance of encountering civilization. With each step, the previous day's horror replayed. The men, the grim discovery, the flight. Who were they? Who lay in that shallow grave? How could he possibly escape this? Hours crawled by. The sun ascended, its warmth a gradual balm, slowly leaching the chill from his clothes. Exhaustion gnawed at him. Hunger cramped his stomach. Fear remained a constant cold companion, yet he maintained his rhythm, one foot, then the other. Every unexpected forest sound made him flinch, convinced his hunters had rediscovered his trail. Mid-afternoon brought the most exquisite music he had ever heard, the distant thrum of internal combustion engines. Hope surged, lending speed to his weary legs. He burst through the tree line onto the shoulder of a paved road, and there, shimmering like a desert mirage, stood a ranger station. He stumbled through the doorway, nearly collapsing, startling the two uniformed figures within. "Help," he choked out, the word ragged. "Please, men, in the forest. They killed someone." The aftermath was a maelstrom of officialdom. Park rangers yielded to state police, who were soon joined by federal agents. Hours blurred into relentless questioning. Search teams mobilized. Helicopters crisscrossed the sector Elias indicated. Ultimately, they unearthed the grave, precisely as he'd described. The victim, a local businessman, reported missing weeks prior. But of Corbin and his associates, no trace remained. They lauded his courage, but Elias felt only the sharp relief of luck mingled with a profound sense of folly. His quest for solitude had nearly been his eulogy. Driving away days later, the wilderness he returned to was irrevocably altered. His sanctuary now harbored unseen shadows, whispered secrets he could no longer ignore. Yet, it had also revealed a resilience within him, a tenacity he hadn't known he possessed. He doesn't seek solitude in the deep woods anymore, not alone. But he returns, drawn back to the trees, the trails. And when he walks among them now, his senses are perpetually heightened, his gaze sweeping, alert. The forest taught him a harsh lesson. Beauty can mask profound darkness, and survival sometimes hinges on anticipating the unthinkable lurking just beyond the visible edge. A disquiet settled in me the moment I crossed the threshold of that cavernous old studio. The corridor behind breathed an odor of curing earth and the phantoms of long-dead cigarettes. My chest cinched tight as the door swung inward. Overhead, a naked bulb sputtered, hesitated, then surrendered to a steady, stark illumination. The walls soared higher than anticipated, tattooed with dark, weeping trails that bled from ceiling to floor. The definitive thud of the door sealing itself behind me felt disproportionately final. I stood clutching my satchel of brushes and pigment tubes, a faint tinnitus singing in my ears, trying to quell the rising disquiet. A bargain space, ample room to create. That was the mantra. Cracks, a touch of damp. These were acceptable compromises. Yet, something in the way those walls held the light, the way the stains mapped their surfaces, sent a cold dread spidering up my spine. It was a single, immense chamber, floored in raw concrete, punctuated only by a tall window at the far end. This aperture gazed onto a constricted alleyway, catching the muted rumble and Doppler sigh of unseen traffic passing on the street beyond. My supplies found a temporary home in a corner, their proper arrangement deferred. I paced the perimeter, conducting a cursory inspection, fingers tracing the rough texture of plaster, probing areas that seemed suspiciously softened. Mildew bloomed in umber constellations here and there. Manageable, I reasoned. The imperative was to erect my easel, to lose myself in the familiar ritual of paint. I deliberately averted my focus from the peculiar shapes suggested by the water damage, dismissing the haunting silhouettes as mere accidents of decay. Nightfall found me dragging canvases into the studio's heart, arranging them like silent monoliths. An old trestle table became the altar for my brushes and paints, presided over by a small lamp whose focused glow offered respite from the harsh glare above. Each footstep resonated, coaxing squeals from the ancient floorboards. A subtle symphony of creaks emanated from the walls themselves. The building settling, I insisted inwardly. Before a waiting canvas, stark white and expectant, I paused, seeking that elusive flicker of inspiration. Instead, a peculiar chill permeated the air. A quick scan confirmed the window remained shut. I turned back, attempting to anchor my gaze on the blank expanse. Charcoal in hand, I began to sketch, loose and tentative. My fingers felt alien, unsteady, my thoughts scattered like startled birds. Again and again, my eyes strayed to the far wall, half expecting movement in the periphery. Several times I ceased drawing, peering intently into the gloom. Under the angled lamplight, the fissures in the plaster seemed to deepen, to writhe. Illusory shadows, not cast by my own form, danced at the edges of vision. Stepping back, I rubbed tired eyes, attributing the phantoms to fatigue. The canvas remained untouched by color that night. I retreated to a narrow cot tucked near the corner, where sleep proved elusive, snagged on every minute sound. The clangor of pipes, ghostly footfalls echoing in the hall, the sibilant hiss of the radiator. Twice I startled awake, utterly convinced someone stood silhouetted against the window pane. Dawn arrived with a crick in my neck and a peculiar, pressing urgency. My eyes felt scraped raw. A dull headache pulsed behind my temples. On a small electric burner, I brewed coffee, its bitterness a welcome jolt. Staring at the untouched canvas, I felt a need for something visceral, immediate. Pigment squeezed onto the palette, colors swirled into muddy complexities, broad strokes attacked the surface. My usual inclination leans towards abstraction, yet now, unbidden, a form emerged, vaguely, disturbingly human. The brush seemed to possess its own volition. Attempts to divert, to fracture the image into safer geometries, proved futile. The paint insisted on delineating this nascent figure. A soft scraping sound whispered from behind. I spun, heart hammering against my ribs. Only the tall, stained walls met my gaze. Crossing the floor, I pressed my palm against a cracked patch of plaster. It felt clammy, unnaturally cold. A faint, rhythmic dripping echoed from somewhere above. My eyes scanned the ceiling, finding only more elaborate stains. Returning to the easel, I froze. The figure I'd been painting, it wasn't quite as I'd left it. An arm seemed to have elongated, reaching subtly towards the canvas's left edge, a gesture of silent implication. Headshake, a trick of the light perhaps, a misinterpretation of my own chaotic strokes. I cleansed the brush, dipped it anew, and forced myself onward. By midday, a crude effigy occupied the canvas, hollow-featured, lacking definition save for the dark suggestions of eyes and mouth. An unnerving reciprocity emanated from it. The painting seemed to observe me. I stood restless, tapping a foot, unnerved by my own creation. Reaching for more paint, my hand trembled. The fine hairs on my arms lifted, the very air feeling charged, expectant. Late afternoon demanded a sortie for more supplies. Stepping into the corridor, I registered the dim, flickering state of the lights. Silence emanated from behind the other closed doors on the floor, an unnatural stillness for such an old structure. The stairwell swallowed my descending footsteps, amplifying each tread into a lonely echo. Outside, the city air felt blessedly clean. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding captive. Paint secured, new brushes acquired, a hasty meal procured. Yet a knot tightened in my gut throughout the errand, a profound reluctance to return. Back inside, the studio seemed to have swallowed the remaining light. The overhead bulb still functioned, but shadows pooled thickly in the corners, deepening the room's vastness. Supplies deposited on the desk, I approached the primary canvas. My breath hitched. The figure's posture had undeniably shifted once more. The altered arm now gestured more overtly, almost beckoning towards the far, stained wall. Heart accelerating, I reached out, touching the painted surface. Dry, solid. I scanned the room frantically. Had I jostled the easel, tilted it inadvertently? Nothing was disturbed. Swallowing hard against a rising panic, I dredged up memories of past frights born of overactive imagination, attempting to file this under the same category. As evening deepened, I positioned my lamp to illuminate a different section of wall, intending to start fresh, to ignore the unsettling first canvas. A new, clean surface awaited on a second easel. I threw myself into applying broad fields of color, seeking distraction in the physical act. Yet my concentration fractured, my gaze repeatedly flicking over my shoulder towards the first painting, anticipating another clandestine transformation. Each glance tightened the vice around my chest. Sweat slicked my palms. I wiped them on my trousers, forcing my attention back to the nascent work. Around 10, a soft, distinct rap sounded at the door. I froze, eyes locked on the handle, expecting it to turn. Silence followed. No voice, no further sound from the hallway. An inexplicable paralysis held me. The simple act of opening the door felt monumental, terrifying. My breathing grew shallow. Wiping paint from my fingers with a rag, I stood utterly still, listening. The silence beyond the door pressed against my eardrums, thick and watchful. The urge to investigate warred with a primal instinct to remain sealed within. Minutes crawled by. Eventually, I attempted to shake off the tension, turning back towards the second canvas. At some indeterminate point, exhaustion claimed me at the desk. I awoke abruptly to a faint, dragging noise near the window. My eyes snapped open, darting towards the glass. A dark shape flickered past, a fleeting silhouette against the alley's dim light. Someone walking below, perhaps. Rising, I moved to the window. The alley lay empty, desolate. A rusted fire escape clung precariously to the adjacent building, unoccupied. My mouth was parched. Reaching for a glass of water on the desk, I noticed my lamp was extinguished. I had no memory of switching it off. The overhead light, however, remained on, casting its unforgiving glare across the concrete floor. A surge of adrenaline jolted through me as my gaze fell upon the first painting. The figure had altered again. Its arms were now fully outstretched, flung wide, and behind it, two fainter, more nebulous shapes had materialized. A wave of icy fear constricted my chest. My vision swam momentarily. Drawn by a morbid fascination, I approached the canvas, hand outstretched. The paint felt inert, yet the forms depicted pulsed with a dreadful, latent energy. Staring, mesmerized, I felt sweat trace cold paths down my back. The following day demanded routine. Early rising, a hurried shower in the communal bathroom down the hall, a functional breakfast at a nearby diner, rituals invoked against the encroaching dread. Daylight, I hoped, would dispel the shadows, both literal and figurative. Returning to the studio, armed with fresh resolve, I stepped inside and was immediately assaulted by a musty, cloying odor like decaying fabric. The very air felt heavier, more resistant. I wrestled the window open, inviting a breeze, but it carried only the sour breath of the alley. Defeated, I shut it again, resolving to ignore the miasma. Another canvas was prepared. I forced myself towards brightness, towards the idea of a landscape, something grounded. My brushstrokes, though tremulous, managed to lay down initial layers of color. Then, a soft whisper, seeming to originate just behind my right shoulder. My name breathed low. I whirled around. Empty space. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. The brush slipped from my grasp, splattering wet pigment across my shoes. A muttered curse, a rag snatched up, bending to clean the mess, and a crushing weight of dread descended, an urgent impulse to flee warring with a stubborn refusal to yield. In the afternoon, distinct footsteps sounded from the floor above, pacing back and forth directly overhead. Then, abrupt silence. I waited, listening intently, but the sounds did not resume. My gaze lifted to the ceiling. The caretaker had mentioned the building was largely vacant. Unease prickled my skin. My mind raced, conjuring images of stealthy intruders. A quick check of the hallway revealed only echoing emptiness. Evening found me utterly depleted. Slumped on the cot, I stared at the walls until the stains began to coalesce into leering visages. Exhaustion, hunger, rational explanations offered little comfort. Instant noodles, cooked on the burner, were consumed in thick silence, punctuated only by the radiator's intermittent hiss and the persistent flicker of the overhead bulb. My second painting remained a chaotic, unfinished landscape. The first painting, however, seemed to have gained presence, dominating the room. The figure's features had sharpened subtly. The suggestion of eyes now seemed to follow my movements. A new strategy formed: obliteration. I would paint over the figure entirely. Seizing a wide brush and a can of thick white gesso, I stood before the first canvas. My hand trembled as I began to apply the covering layer. As the brush swept across the area of the face, a low whisper curled directly into my ear. I recoiled violently, the brush flying from my hand to strike the canvas, leaving a starburst of white across the figure's spectral form. The whispering ceased, but my heart hammered violently. Grimly, I retrieved the brush and continued, driven now by a desperate necessity. Layer upon opaque layer was applied, yet the figure resisted annihilation. Its outline remained stubbornly visible, a palimpsest beneath the white shroud. Finally, breathless, I stepped back, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I became aware of the deepening gloom in the studio's corners. The overhead light seemed perceptibly dimmer. Flicking the switch yielded only more erratic sputtering. I moved my lamp closer, but this only intensified the darkness pooling behind me. The thought of leaving beckoned, yet an obsessive need to fully obscure that haunting shape held me captive. More paint, applied faster now, almost frantically. Faint noises surfaced behind me, a soft shuffling, the impression of muffled respiration. I spun around, brush dripping, confronting only emptiness. My breathing grew ragged, shallow. My hand shook too violently to continue. Enough. I could finish in the morning. Turning towards the exit, ready to escape into the night, I reached for the doorknob. A sharp, intense chill touched the nape of my neck, intimate as an exhaled breath. Every hair on my arms prickled, my throat constricted. I whirled, fists clenched, body coiled to fight. Nothing. The room was still, save for my own ragged breathing. I realized my entire body was trembling. The painting stood sentinel in the center of the vast space. The first canvas, despite its layers of white, still held the ghost of the figure. The second showed a landscape twisted into nightmare, warped by my own encroaching fear. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The walls seemed to sway, leaning inward. I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the hallway. Down the echoing stairs, my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The lobby was deserted. The heavy front door groaned as I pushed it open, releasing me into the cool night air. Deep breaths gulped greedily. My hands were slick with sweat, my mouth desert dry. I walked aimlessly around the block, trying to regain equilibrium. Every sound startled me. A bottle clattering into a bin, a slamming car door, distant laughter. The city felt menacing, watchful. Returning seemed unthinkable, yet the pull of the studio, of the unfinished confrontation, was undeniable. This was my space, my work trapped inside. Steeling myself against the sinking dread in my stomach, I re-entered the building's oppressive silence. The climb back up the stairs felt longer, each step heavier. The hallway lights hummed, casting a sickly yellow pallor. Unlocking my door, I pushed it open and stepped back inside, listening. Only the frantic beat of my own blood rushing in my ears answered. I walked directly to the easels. The paintings appeared unchanged, yet the sense of presence in the room was palpable, a tangible weight in the air. My skin tingled. Focus felt slippery, elusive. Grabbing a clean brush, I resolved to paint something neutral, mundane, an anchor. Black paint touched a fresh, small canvas. Strokes formed, hesitant at first, then gaining a disturbing momentum. My thoughts remained chaotic, pulse erratic. I attempted to depict the studio itself, its stark geometry, but my hand betrayed me, sketching vague, distorted figures once more, limbs attenuated, features blurred into anonymity. A subtle vibration began under my feet, a faint rhythmic tapping seemingly originating from the floor below. The basement, the caretaker had said, was merely storage. Kneeling, I pressed my ear to the cold concrete. A low, indistinct murmur reached me. Perhaps the gurgle of old pipes, perhaps something else entirely. Voices. A throb started behind my eyes. A glance at my watch. Past midnight. Exhaustion warred with hypervigilance. I retreated to the cot, seeking sleep I knew would not come easily. Yet sleep must have claimed me, for I jolted awake to the sharp crack of falling canvas. I scrambled upright. The second painting, the warped landscape, lay face down on the floor. Rushing over, I lifted it, setting it back on its easel. The impact had smudged the paint. My stomach churned. Touching the surface confirmed parts were still tacky, damp. As I tried to steady my breathing, I noticed them. Fresh streaks marring the background, thin lines like ghostly finger marks. My own hands trembled violently. I hadn't touched it like that. The walls seemed to press closer, the air thickening. Sweat beaded on my forehead. Air. I needed air again. Jacket snatched, lights extinguished. I fled the studio. I intend to return tomorrow, in the clarity of morning, to gather my belongings. Whether I can truly stay, truly work here, remains uncertain. These are not mere shadows born of fatigue. They shift, they interact, they alter the very fabric of my art. They deny rest. They seem to crave representation, demanding I capture their essence, give form to their silent narratives. I suspect they won't simply release me, but neither can I continue adrift in this sea of constant gnawing fear. For now, I stand on the pavement below, gulping the night air, my gaze drawn inexorably upwards to the darkened windows of my studio. The light is off, yet I swear I perceive movement within, a flicker in the deep blackness. A cold weight settles in my gut. My heart pounds a heavy, insistent rhythm. Tomorrow, I go back inside. Perhaps I will face them directly. Perhaps I will paint until their demands are met. Whether that brings peace or deeper entanglement, I cannot say. But I cannot turn away now. I need to understand. If they hunger to be seen, I will paint them. If their stories ache to be told, I will lend my brush to their telling. I only pray I can navigate this threshold without losing myself entirely, for already I feel the pull, the insidious gravity of the shadows within, drawing me towards the edge. Its initial appearance registered as mere happenstance, a flicker at the periphery of my nightly ritual. The second instance, I chided myself for succumbing to phantom anxieties. Yet, by the third consecutive night, seeing that same indistinct form trailing my path along the familiar circuit with Jasper, my golden retriever, the truth settled with glacial certainty. I was being followed. What remained terrifyingly unknown was how this silent, unnerving pursuit would unravel into a crucible testing the very bedrock of my courage. The routine itself was an anchor in the day's drift. 10 o'clock sharp every evening, Jasper and I would embark on our circumambulation of the neighborhood. A placid enclave, this place, all immaculately shorn lawns flanking identical facades, steeped in the kind of profound quiet where disturbances felt architecturally impossible. Or so the illusion held. Our path was immutable. Down Ash Lane, a sharp left onto Willow Way, tracing the curve of the slumbering park, then homeward via Chestnut Close. A tranquil interlude, ordinarily. Just Jasper's panting breath, my footsteps, the sodium glow of street lamps painting the asphalt, the rest of the world tucked away. The first night, it was barely a perception, a figure dissolving into the distance at the street's far end, moving counter to our direction. An insomniac, perhaps, or someone returning late. The thought evaporated instantly. The second night brought a recurrence. Same location, same approximate time. Coincidence, my mind insisted, grasping for plausible narratives. A nocturnal worker decompressing post-shift. But the third night shattered these reassurances. As Jasper and I rounded the corner onto Willow Way, the figure executed the same turn, falling into step behind us, albeit at a distance. An icy filament tightened in my gut. My stride quickened instinctively, Jasper sensing the shift, his leash tautening. A furtive glance over my shoulder confirmed it. The shape maintained its distance, effortlessly matching my accelerated pace. My pulse became a frantic drum against my ribs. A frantic patting of pockets yielded nothing. My phone, idiotically, remained tethered to its charger back home. A cascade of self-recrimination followed. How starkly the warnings about preparedness now resonated. We were approaching the park, the intervals between streetlights stretching, swallowing the pavement in deeper pools of black. The darkness felt tactile, pressing close, animating every hedge and mailbox with imagined menace. Jasper, usually imperturbable, emitted a low whine, nudging my hand, his eyes pools of reflected worry. "Easy, boy," I murmured, the words a flimsy shield for my own escalating dread. Almost there. Another backward look, closer now, definitively closer. Details began to coalesce from the gloom. Masculine build, tall, lean, clad entirely in dark clothing. A baseball cap cast his face into impenetrable shadow. Raw panic surged, obliterating any remaining semblance of composure. I ignited into a sprint. Jasper, startled into a bark that cracked the suburban quiet, galloped beside me, his nails clicking frantically on the concrete. The sound reverberated against the silent houses, yet no curtains twitched, no porch lights flared in response. Then I heard them. Footsteps behind me, rapid, deliberate. He was running, chasing. The starkness of it sent a fresh jolt of terror through my limbs. I abandoned the known route, veering sharply, plunging through the manicured perfection of a stranger's backyard. Jasper bounded ahead, clearing a low decorative fence with ease. I scrambled after, snagging my jeans on splintered wood, the fabric tearing. We emerged onto an unfamiliar side street, lungs searing, breath coming in ragged gasps. A fleeting, desperate hope. Perhaps I'd lost him. Then, the sound. Footsteps, slower now, measured, but undeniably present. Still coming. I ran again, directionless, propelled solely by the primal need for distance. Houses bled into an indistinct smear of darkened windows and sleeping roofs. Lost. The realization struck with sickening force, adrift in the labyrinth of my own neighborhood. A sharp stitch bloomed in my side. My capacity for flight was dwindling. Help. Sanctuary. My eyes scanned frantically, latching onto a beacon. A house, lights glowing warmly in the downstairs windows. Someone was awake. Without pausing to think, I bolted up the driveway, hammering on the front door. "Help!" The cry tore from my throat, raw and desperate. Please, somebody help me. Each second stretched into an agonizing eternity. The footsteps drew nearer, chillingly steady. Jasper, sensing the imminent threat, planted himself between me and the street, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Just as despair began to crystallize, the porch light snapped on, bathing the small space in stark yellow. The door creaked open, revealing a woman, middle-aged, wrapped in a quilted bathrobe, her expression startled but concerned. "Please," I choked out, struggling for air. "Someone's chasing me. Let me in." She barely hesitated, stepping back. I tumbled inside, hauling Jasper with me, the door clicking shut, the deadbolt sliding home with reassuring finality. "My goodness, what happened?" she asked, already moving towards a telephone on a nearby table. "The police?" I nodded mutely, still heaving, leaning against the closed door. As she spoke calmly into the receiver, I risked a glance through the window's edge. The street outside lay vacant, serene under the artificial moonlight. The following hour dissolved into a haze of procedural calm. Officers arrived, their presence both comforting and subtly accusatory. They took my statement, swept the surrounding streets with flashlights. Nothing. No sign of the man in black, no disturbed flower beds, no corroborating evidence whatsoever. "Are you sure, miss?" one of them inquired, his tone carefully neutral but freighted with doubt. "It's very dark out. The mind plays tricks, you know." Frustration warred with a creeping, insidious self-doubt. Had I conjured him from the shadows and my own fatigue? Had panic inflated a harmless passerby into a predator? The kind woman, Eleanor, she introduced herself, offered a spare room, but a sudden, fierce yearning for my own space, my own locks, propelled me to decline. The police cruiser delivered me home, its headlights sweeping the familiar facade. They performed a cursory check inside before leaving me with a contact card and platitudes about vigilance. The click of my own deadbolt locking felt both secure and isolating. Sleep was a foreign country that night. I remained on the sofa, Jasper's warm weight a grounding presence in my lap, starting at every creak of the settling house, every distant siren. Dawn arrived, not as relief, but as pale exhaustion. I called work, fabricating illness, the thought of navigating the outside world unbearable. As the day bled into afternoon, rationality began its insidious campaign, suggesting I'd magnified a fleeting scare, that stress and darkness had conspired to create a phantom. Yet, as evening deepened, pulling the shadows long across the lawn, the familiar hour for Jasper's walk approached, and the fear returned, visceral and paralyzing. The simple act of stepping outside onto those same streets sent tremors through my hands. For the first time since he'd come into my life, Jasper's walk was skipped. His confused whimpers by the door were a reproach, but the threshold felt insurmountable. The backyard became his constrained domain, observed by me with hawk-like intensity from the kitchen window. The next night mirrored the first and the one after. Jasper grew visibly restless, his energy coiling tight within the confines of the house. Guilt gnawed at me, yet the fear held me fast. It was temporary, I told myself, a necessary period of retreat. A week evaporated, then another. My existence contracted. Work became remote. Groceries materialized via delivery apps. My only excursions were brief, hyper-vigilant trips to the backyard with Jasper, my gaze constantly sweeping the perimeter fence. Friends' calls went unanswered or were met with vague excuses. A stubborn flu, unforeseen family matters, anything but the humiliating truth. I had become agoraphobic, a prisoner besieged by an enemy perhaps only imagined. It was Jasper, my steadfast golden shadow, who became the unlikely key. 3 weeks after the night chase, he planted himself resolutely by the front door, refusing the backyard's compromise. He whined, a soft, persistent lament, leash dangling hopefully from his mouth. His soulful brown eyes met mine, brimming with a potent blend of confusion and unwavering expectation. I stood there, hand hovering over the doorknob, for a duration that felt geological. My palms were slick, my heartbeat a frantic bird trapped in my throat. But his quiet insistence, his simple need, chipped away at the wall of fear. I couldn't perpetually fail him. I couldn't let this amorphous dread dictate the contours of our lives indefinitely. Drawing a breath that felt dredged from the deepest part of my lungs, I turned the knob. The cool evening air met my face, a sensory shock that nearly sent me recoiling back into the perceived safety within. But Jasper's answering bark, sharp with anticipation, propelled me forward. One step onto the porch, then another onto the path. Before conscious thought fully caught up, we were at the driveway's edge. My eyes scanned the length of the street, left, right. Nothing but the familiar tableau of quiet houses, parked cars, empty sidewalks bathed in the twilight hush. Slowly, tentatively, like venturing onto thin ice, we began our accustomed route. Every skittering leaf, every distant engine growl sent a jolt through my nervous system. Yet, as we walked, as the expected ambush failed to materialize from the deepening shadows, a fragile layer of tension began to dissolve. The familiar cadence of our steps, the scent of night-blooming jasmine, the ambient hum of the sleeping suburb, elements once taken for granted, started to weave their subtle spell of normalcy. We were nearing the park's edge when I saw him. A man, tall, lean, dressed in dark athletic wear, walking towards us. My breath hitched. I froze mid-stride, the cold dread of 3 weeks prior flooding back instantly. But as he drew nearer, recognition dawned. It wasn't the figure from that night. It was Mr. Henderson from 3 houses down, a widower known for his late evening constitutionals. He offered a neighborly wave as he passed. I managed a shaky smile in return, the adrenaline slowly receding. Completing the loop, turning back onto Chestnut Close towards home, I felt a distinct internal shift. Fear hadn't vanished. It lingered, a subtle dissonance beneath the quiet night. But it no longer held the reins. I had confronted it, stepped deliberately into the arena of my anxiety, and emerged onto the other side. The path forward wouldn't be seamless. There would be nights when shadows danced menacingly, when innocuous sounds would trigger a cascade of remembered panic. But the paralysis was broken. I understood, with newfound clarity, that I could not allow a single night of terror to permanently remap my world. Unlocking my front door, Jasper trotting happily beside me, his tail tracing joyful arcs in the air, I made a silent vow. Caution, yes. Prudence, absolutely. But not capitulation. I would reclaim my routine, my neighborhood, my nocturnal peace, one step, one walk at a time. Victory, I realized, wasn't the absence of fear, but the quiet courage to move forward while feeling it. And tonight, bathed in the ordinary glow of my hallway light, I had taken that first, vital step. The first time the script bloomed in the margins of my book, a precise, unfamiliar hand, I brushed it off as a phantom of my own making, a forgotten impulse. But the annotations began to breathe, to parry my unvoiced thoughts, dissecting my interpretations, challenging the bedrock of my convictions. Then I knew. Something else, something intricate and unnerving, was unfolding within the pages. A bibliophage, that's what I am. My apartment testifies, less a home, more a vertical archive, walls tessellated with spines. My reverence for books borders on the monastic, pages uncreased, bindings intact. So, that initial annotation nestled within my treasured, time-softened copy of 1984's, flared like a distress signal. "Is this truly liberty?" it queried, adjacent to a passage whose weight had always settled deep within me. A frown etched itself onto my face. When had I inscribed this? The script wasn't my usual hurried cursive. Perhaps a moment of profound resonance had demanded unusual calligraphic care. I dismissed the anomaly, turning the page. Yet, the marginalia persisted, multiplying as I journeyed deeper into Oceania. These were not mere jottings. They were incisive dialogues, provocative counterpoints, forcing an engagement with the text I hadn't experienced since my undergraduate days. The true strangeness, however, didn't crystallize until the final, bleak chapter. There, inked in that same meticulous hand, a question awaited, sending tendrils of ice through my veins. Your reaction to my earlier points. I find myself anticipating your perspective. The book slammed shut, my pulse hammered against my ribs. Impossible. An absolute certainty resonated within me. These notes were not mine. But their origin? Their author? Their purpose? The question spiraled. Over the ensuing days, the book drew me back, its gravity undeniable. I scrutinized the passages, the annotations. Always the same hand, yet the ink possessed subtle variations in saturation, suggesting disparate moments of inscription. Some comments felt unnervingly synchronous with my own silent reactions, as though the writer occupied the space between my thoughts. Fear warred with fascination, and curiosity ultimately tipped the scales. I armed myself with a pen. Beside one particularly challenging note, feeling a tremor of the absurd, I wrote, "Identify yourself." I left the volume agape on the low table beside my armchair and retreated into the uneasy landscape of sleep. Morning arrived, a battleground of apprehension and electric anticipation. I approached the book. Beneath my stark query, fresh ink glistened. A kindred spirit in print, one who values the resonance of shared ideas. Did you perceive the echoes between the parties' dominion and the architecture of modern connection? Thus began the most peculiar literary discourse imaginable. Weeks dissolved into a rhythm of return, to the book, to the dialogue unfolding in its margins. I'd parry arguments, offer interpretations, await the inevitable reply. We dissected ideology, plumbed character depths, wove threads between Orwell's dystopia and the unfolding present. It was intoxicating, intellectually rigorous, and profoundly disquieting. Logic screamed impossibility. Paper does not converse. Ink does not spontaneously materialize. Yet, the sheer thrill of this connection, this communion with an intelligence that seemed to anticipate my own mental landscape, was undeniable. The phenomenon spread, metastasizing through my collection. A novel untouched for years would reveal commentary on a forgotten plot twist. Philosophical treatises bristled with refutations to arguments I hadn't yet fully articulated. My world contracted, shrinking to the dimensions of my apartment, the silent company of my books, and the burgeoning conversation within their borders. Social engagements withered, calls went unanswered. Nights bled into mornings as I hunched over pages, penning responses, hungry for the next volley. But the tenor of the exchange began to curdle. The notes grew sharper, their intellectual curiosity tinged with confrontation. This presence, for I conceived of it now as a singular, impossible entity, seemed to take a perverse pleasure in dismantling my positions, in compelling me to defend beliefs I wasn't certain I truly possessed. Is that your genuine conviction? A margin would demand. Or merely the shape of your conditioning? Doubt became my shadow, questioning my convictions, my recollections, the very architecture of myself. The entity knew things unwritten, unspoken. It alluded to conversations buried by years, to choices made and mourned in silence. Recall telling Clara you loved her, inquired a note one afternoon, appearing inexplicably in a tattered collection of poetry I hadn't opened. Why the falsehood? A clammy chill slicked my skin. That admission, barely whispered to myself in the darkest hours, how could it possibly know? The invasion intensified. Notes materialized beyond the sanctuary of book margins, scrawled on discarded receipts pulled from my pockets, etched onto the condensation blanketing the bathroom mirror post-shower. You are not the person you perceive, they insisted. Your performance is transparent. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, haunted by the anticipation of what new pronouncements dawn might bring. Sanity frayed at the edges. Was this a fugue state? Was I the architect of my own haunting? In a spasm of desperation, I resolved to purge the books. Cartons filled, destined for donation, for oblivion. But lifting the lid of the first box revealed a maelstrom of script. Every page densely overwritten, words colliding, intertwining into an illegible tapestry of ink. You cannot erase me so readily, the overlapping text seemed to pulse. I am woven into you now. I carried them, box by heavy box, to the bathtub and struck a match. Flames consumed the paper, pages curling into black, brittle ghosts. Yet the following morning, my shelves stood replenished, the books immaculate, untouched, until opened. The notes were there, patiently waiting. I ceased responding, attempting an embargo of silence against the ceaseless tide of messages. But the script persisted, growing insistent, almost petulant, then menacing. Why this silence? They probed. Surely you understand the discourtesy of leaving a conversation unfinished. The entity shed its guise of intellectual companion, revealing something more akin to a parasite, burrowing into every facet of my existence. Every printed word became suspect, every volume a potential vessel for its voice. One final, desperate gambit remained. I sought out the oldest, most sacred text in my possession. A worn volume of Andersen's Tales, its cover softened by the touch of my mother's hands, its pages imbued with the cadence of her voice, reading aloud in my childhood. Years had passed since I dared disturb its fragile state. With hands that trembled, I eased open the cover. There, on the flyleaf, inscribed not in the entity's precise script, but in my mother's familiar looping cursive, was a dedication. To my dearest Elias, it read, "May you forever discover enchantment within the written word. Remember, the narratives we construct for ourselves inevitably shape our being. Choose your tales with care." I gazed at the inscription, a profound internal shift occurring, like tumblers falling into place. A memory, submerged for years, surfaced. My mother, encouraging me to annotate, to argue with authors in the margins, to make the stories my own. The realization struck with the force of revelation. There was no entity, no external intelligence colonizing my books and my mind. It was me. It had always been me. The notes, the debates, the invasive, intimate knowledge. Facets of my own psyche I had refused to confront. Questions I had lacked the courage to ask myself. In the vacuum of my isolation, starved for intellectual friction, I had conjured a counterpart, an impossible interlocutor, and in doing so, I had nearly fractured my own reality. Gently, I closed the book, a confluence of relief and melancholy washing over me. The enigma was solved, yet the passage through it had irrevocably altered my internal landscape. The days that followed marked a slow, tentative re-emergence. I reached out to neglected friends, stepped out into the tangible world, sought the unpredictable currents of human interaction rather than the controlled dialogue within paper confines. Yet, I did not abandon the practice of marginalia. Instead, I reclaimed it, filling the white space with my authentic thoughts, my uncertainties, my evolving understanding. I initiated a reading group, craving the vital exchange of ideas with others, the bracing challenge of minds meeting in real space. The annotations remain within my books, a palimpsest of my journey, a record of the conversation I conducted with the deepest, loneliest parts of myself. Occasionally, in the quiet solitude of late hours, rereading those exchanges, I trace the contours of my own mind's labyrinth. And sometimes, just sometimes, I fancy I glimpse a new annotation appearing in that familiar, meticulous script. But now, no fear accompanies the sight, only a faint, knowing smile. The most vital dialogues, after all, are often those we hold with the self we are becoming. "11 o'clock chimed silently on my wristwatch as the shift began, the hour precise. Tuesday nights draped the hotel lobby in their customary hush. I lingered near the grand entrance doors, offering a curt nod to a departing guest before indulging in a slow, deliberate stretch of my arms. Elias is the name stitched onto my uniform, and for nigh on 4 years, I've been the sentinel of these nocturnal hours, the night doorman. My usual adversaries, intoxicated patrons, misplaced key cards, the sporadic lobby squabble. Predictability is the bedrock of this job, until several nights passed when the routine fractured. Something aberrant began stirring in the early morning hours, centered on the main elevator. Initially, I dismissed it as fatigue playing tricks on perception, but the anomaly repeated, solidified into certainty. The lift was making unscheduled stops on a floor that, officially, did not exist. Let me recount its genesis. The first instance occurred near 2 in the morning. I occupied my usual station, a shadow leaning near the reception desk, surveying the vacant expanse of the lobby. My gaze drifted upwards, catching the elevator's digital indicator panel above the polished brass doors. Numbers ascended, descended, blinked softly, routine transits between levels. Then, abruptly, it registered. 13, a fleeting scarlet glyph, there for a heartbeat, then darkness. I blinked, rubbed my eyes vigorously. This establishment boasts 12 floors. 13 is conspicuously absent, excised by the owner's superstitious bent, a common practice in older structures I knew. Though I hold little stock in such beliefs, the incongruity flared like a warning signal. I crossed the marble floor to the elevator bank, summoning the car. When the doors whispered open, the cabin was deserted, bathed in its standard, sterile illumination. Puzzled, I stepped inside. The button for the 12th floor yielded a smooth ascent. Upon arrival, I disembarked, paced the corridor. Everything appeared immaculate, undisturbed. Hallway sconces cast their warm glow. The carpet lay pristine. The vending machine hummed its monotonous tune in the alcove. Nothing amiss. Returning to the lift, I descended, convincing myself it had been a momentary misreading, a trick of tired eyes. The following night, however, vigilance became my watchword. I monitored the elevator's display panel with unwavering focus each time the carriage moved. Leaning against the cool granite of the front desk, arms folded, I tracked the luminous numerals climbing and falling. Guests trickled in and out. The midnight exodus from the ground floor lounge dispersed, leaving a wake of slightly unsteady patrons returning to their rooms. Then, closer to 1:30, the indicator ascended to 12, hesitated, and stuttered. There it was again, 13, a phantom numeral held for perhaps half a second before the panel went inert. A jolt shot through me, my pulse quickening, that familiar roller coaster drop sensation churning in my gut. I strode directly towards the elevator. As if anticipating my arrival, the door slid open unbidden, revealing the same vacant interior. On the third night, mere observation felt insufficient. A test was in order. Around 2, the lobby submerged in its deepest quietude, I entered the elevator myself. Methodically, I pressed each floor button, 2 through 12, seeking any electronic hiccup. The journey was flawless. Each floor greeted me with silent normalcy, the panel displaying the correct designation on every ascent and descent. By 3 o'clock, I was almost resigned to accepting it as a random, inexplicable electrical quirk, something to be noted and forgotten. But as I stepped back into the lobby, the doors gliding shut behind me, I glimpsed it through the narrowing gap. 13, defiant and brief, before vanishing. The elevator ascended without me. A wave of cold tension washed over my skin. My palms grew damp. I stabbed the call button repeatedly. The car returned, empty, docile. My heart hammered against my ribs, yet a compulsive curiosity overruled caution. I entered, pressed 12, waited. The ascent was smooth, floors ticking by. 2, 3, 4, up to 12. It halted. The doors remained sealed. Inside the cabin, the panel above the door flickered erratically. It leaped from 12 to 13. Then, with a soft sigh, the doors parted. I found myself gazing into a corridor steeped in gloom. The very walls seemed subtly askew, canted at an unnatural angle. The carpet underfoot appeared threadbare, worn in ways the other floors were not. An odor permeated the air, stale cigarette smoke clinging obstinately to something damp, like aged, neglected fabric. My heart's frantic rhythm pulsed in my temples, threatening a headache. Tentatively, I extended 1 foot across the threshold. The atmosphere felt heavy, resistant. Overhead lights buzzed with an irritating persistence, one bulb sputtering fitfully. Doors lined the hallway, mirroring the layout of the known floors, yet they bore an aspect of profound dustiness, their handles filmed with a dull tarnish. I swallowed against a suddenly parched throat. A tremor started in my hands. I clenched them into fists, seeking steadiness. Every instinct screamed retreat, yet the enigma pulled me onward. Reaching for the nearest doorknob, I found it unyielding, locked fast. I proceeded cautiously down the corridor, testing each door in succession. All remained stubbornly secured. Silence reigned, broken only by the incessant electrical hum and the sound of my own breathing, shallow and rapid. Halfway along the passage, a flicker of movement near the far end snagged my peripheral vision. A shadow detaching itself, perhaps, or a trick of the failing light. My stomach clenched. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear them, but upon looking again, the space was empty. A glance back confirmed the elevator doors remained open, an inviting or perhaps warning aperture. A visceral certainty urged retreat. I turned, hurried back to the waiting lift, and stepped inside. I jabbed the lobby button. The doors closed with a silken whoosh. The internal panel blinked once, then displayed 13, shifting immediately to 12, and descending rapidly through the floors to 1, then L. The doors opened onto the familiar, brightly lit ground floor. The air felt clean, almost bracing. I exited, pulse still racing. No one seemed to notice. Finn, the desk clerk, was nodding off behind the counter. The subsequent night, I resolved to dismiss the experience, a waking dream born of exhaustion. Yet by 1 in the morning, a familiar tension coiled in my chest, an involuntary anticipation of that forbidden numeral's reappearance. Coffee became my ally against drowsiness, my eyes darting constantly to the elevator panel whenever it stirred. Around 2:15, it happened. The numbers climbed to 12, paused, then flashed 13 for a single stark beat before extinguishing. I gritted my teeth, approached the lift, pressed the button. Empty. Always empty. I stepped inside. A disconcerting lightness filled my head, but I pressed 12 regardless. The sequence repeated. Arrival at 12. The pause. The spectral transition. The doors opening onto that warped corridor. This time, I compelled myself to venture deeper. The elevator doors lingered open for several heartbeats, then slid shut behind me without command. The sound rattled me, but I pressed on, stomach churning. A bead of sweat traced a path down my temple. Each door presented the same desolate face, ancient tarnished knobs, paint flaking like sunburnt skin. The overhead lights buzzed, accompanied now by a low hum emanating from within the walls. Ventilation perhaps, but distorted, unwell. I focused on my breathing, trying to impose calm on shuddering nerves. My legs felt leaden. Placing a hand flat against one of the doors, I pushed. A faint click, but no give. Then, a dull thud echoed from somewhere ahead. I froze, every muscle rigid. My palms were slick. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I tried to call out, but my voice caught, strangled in my throat. One hesitant step forward. The carpet yielded strangely beneath my shoes, thick and soft, as if padded with layers of decay. The musty odor intensified, coating my tongue with the taste of dust. Another thud, closer this time. Wiping my damp hands on my trousers, I advanced a few more paces and rounded a corner. A short side hallway branched off, terminating at a single door marked only by a dark, featureless metal plate. No number. A utility closet, I surmised. I stood about 6 feet away, observing it, my breath unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. My hand resumed its trembling. Stepping closer, I reached for the handle. It felt frigid and slick beneath my fingers, metal untouched by warmth for what seemed an eternity. The door groaned in protest as I pushed it inward. Inside, a small square room lay revealed, illuminated by a single naked bulb suspended from the ceiling. Peeling wallpaper, patterned with faded blooms, clung precariously to the walls. The air within was stagnant, redolent of soiled laundry confined too long. A simple table occupied the center, flanked by a few chairs. A film of dust coated every surface. One chair was pulled away from the table, angled slightly. I circled it, the floorboards creaking ominously under my weight. Then I saw them. Footprints etched into the thick dust. Not my own. Faint, blurred outlines leading towards a corner of the room where they simply ceased. A surge of pure dread constricted my throat. I backed out of the room hastily, pulling the groaning door shut behind me, and hurried back down the main corridor towards the elevators. The hallway seemed to stretch, elongating before me. The lights flickered more violently now, mirroring the frantic tempo of my pulse. Finally, the elevator doors came into view at the far end, closed. My pace quickened to a near run. I jammed my finger against the call button, the silence amplifying the ringing in my ears. An eternity seemed to pass before the doors slid open. I scrambled inside, fumbling for the lobby button, my shaking hand nearly striking the wrong panel. The indicator blinked. 13, then 12, then a swift descent. The doors opened onto the blessed normalcy of the lobby. I practically stumbled out, my legs threatening to buckle. The bright lights and clean carpet felt like a sanctuary. I swiped a sleeve across my damp forehead, glancing around furtively. Finn remained absorbed in his computer screen. A lone guest sat slumped in an armchair, engrossed in a phone. My near panic had gone unobserved. Seeking refuge, I slipped into the staff restroom, locked the door, and splashed cold water onto my face. My reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, my shirt clinging damply under my arms. Leaning heavily against the basin, I took deep, ragged breaths until the tremors subsided enough for me to return to the lobby. Later that same night, around 3:30, the panel above the elevator doors performed its spectral flicker once more. This time, I remained rooted to my spot. No pursuit, no investigation. I simply waited. The elevator descended to the lobby, paused, and the doors slid open of their own accord. I stared into the vacant car, my heart thudding a heavy, wary rhythm against my ribs. Another unguided tour was unthinkable without some form of preparation. I held my ground. After several seconds of gaping emptiness, the doors whispered shut, and the indicator panel returned to its usual dormant state. Over the ensuing nights, the pattern held. Sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning, the inexorable sequence would unfold. The ascent to 12, the flicker to 13, the unveiling of that distorted reality. Twice more, I ventured across the threshold, but only briefly, my explorations curtailed by a mounting sense of dread. Each visit revealed further decay. The pervasive odor intensified in certain areas. A slow drip from a stained ceiling tile marked a damp patch on the warped floor. The paint on the walls near one end had bubbled and blistered. I never encountered another soul, yet the silence was punctuated by unsettling sounds. A distinct scrape, as if something heavy were dragged across the floorboards. A faint, distant bang. My pulse leaped at each noise, adrenaline flooding my limbs with a feverish heat. The oppressive feeling of being fundamentally unwelcome, of trespassing in a place not meant to be seen, clung to me long after I returned to the lobby. One night, I cautiously mentioned to Finn, the desk clerk, that the main elevator seemed prone to electrical shorts, citing odd noises. He offered a non-committal shrug, muttering something about reporting it to maintenance, though we both understood the glacial pace at which building management addressed non-critical issues. Crucially, the elevator functioned perfectly for guests, never betraying its secret floor during normal operation. The phenomenon manifested only in the deep quiet of the night. Finn, rarely straying from his post, displayed minimal interest. A profound reluctance to approach the elevator after 1 a.m. began to settle over me. I manufactured tasks, busying myself with minor cleaning duties around the lobby and entrance, polishing brass fixtures, straightening brochures, sorting the meager contents of the lost and found drawer. Yet, awareness of the elevator remained a constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. Sometime during the night, inevitably, it would flash 13. A persistent tightness gripped my shoulders. My legs felt perpetually tense, my lower back aching from prolonged standing. Last night pushed the boundaries further than ever before. The time was approximately 2:45 a.m. The panel climbed to 12, flickered, solidified momentarily into 13. This time, I needed tangible evidence. Retrieving my phone, I activated the camera, its small lens aimed forward as I stepped into the lift. I pressed 12. When the doors opened onto that other place, I began recording. My phone's beam cut a swathe through the gloom, illuminating the skewed walls. I moved slowly, deliberately, the familiar constriction tightening in my chest. Past the locked doors, down the main corridor, until I reached the entrance to the side passage. The unnumbered door stood as before. Inside the small room, the dusty footprints remained, leading to their abrupt terminus in the corner. Then, a sharp scraping sound echoed from behind me. My heart seized, then hammered violently. I spun around, phone held high, but the beam caught only the empty length of the corridor. Nothing. A string of curses escaped my lips, barely a whisper. I panned the camera slowly, capturing the door, the hallway, the oppressive emptiness. My mouth was desert dry, my scalp prickling with goose flesh. The unnerving sensation of being observed intensified, a palpable pressure despite the absolute lack of visible presence. Retreating cautiously, phone still recording, my hand unsteady, I reached the elevator bank to find the doors closed. I jabbed the call button, the indicator light blinking patiently. The wait felt interminable. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced something would emerge from the shadows at the end of the hall. My own pulse throbbed painfully in my ears. Finally, the door slid open. I lunged inside, slapping the lobby button with frantic relief. The panel flickered, 13 to 12, then descended rapidly. Bursting out into the lobby, I nearly tripped. I rushed to the relative safety of the front desk and immediately checked my phone. The screen displayed only rolling static. The audio track was a mess of pops and crackles, devoid of discernible sound or image. The hallway, the room, the footprints, none of it captured, just digital noise, darkness punctuated by distorted pixel bursts. My hand trembled as I locked the phone and shoved it deep into my pocket. A wave of nausea rolled through my stomach. I remained behind the desk for the duration of my shift, speaking to no one, my gaze returning compulsively to the elevator doors. They remained quiescent for the rest of the night. When my shift concluded at the first light of 7 a.m., I fled the building with unseemly haste. Sharing this experience feels impossible. Disbelief, accusations of stress, or worse, of fabrication, seem the likely responses. Yet, the reality of it is branded onto my senses. I've inhaled the thick, cloying air of that impossible hallway. I've carried its stale residue on my clothes. I've heard the disembodied knocks and scrapes. I've seen the warped architecture, the flickering lights, the eternally locked doors. Returning there is the last thing I desire, yet the nature of my job leaves little room for choice. If the elevator signals its passage to 13 again, my current strategy is stark avoidance. I will stand here in the lobby and feign ignorance. That is the plan. Maintain composure. Survive the shift. That is the extent of my ambition now. Should the elevator call again tonight, I intend to remain deaf to its summons. I have no wish to revisit that place. What resides on the 13th floor I cannot fathom, and a growing certainty tells me I am better off not knowing. The quiet pressed in first, a profound vacancy where the morning's avian symphony should have been, leaving only a ringing stillness. Emerging from her cocoon of nylon into the pearlescent mist of dawn, Elara felt a dissonant chord strike within her. The familiar woods had shifted key overnight. Something was intrinsically off. These ancient trees were meant to be a balm, a refuge sought after the relentless grind of the city and the jagged shards of a love affair gone sour. 3 days deep into the backcountry, the wilderness cure of solitude suddenly felt less like sanctuary, more like raw exposure. Unfurling stiff limbs from the tense confines, Elara scanned the small clearing carved out for her existence. Then, stark against the damp umber earth, impressions. Not the familiar, reassuring tread of her own boots, nor the delicate tracery of forest creatures. These were naked human prints, looping her shelter in a silent, possessive dance. Air hitched in her throat. A frantic pulse hammered against her ribs. Her gaze traced the path of the prints to her rucksack, slumped against a gnarled pine where she'd left its sentinel the night before. The main zipper gaped open like a wound, its contents disturbed, subtly rearranged. She scrambled towards it, trembling fingers delving into the familiar chaos, finding everything present yet handled, violated by unseen hands. Elara pivoted, eyes sweeping the dense wall of trees, searching the shifting veils of mist for any flicker of motion, any betrayal of presence. Silence answered, thick and watchful. Breathe, she commanded her frantic mind. Think, a lost wanderer perhaps, disoriented, seeking aid. The explanation felt hollow, flimsy against the deliberate circling, the careful, soundless rummaging. No, this was something else entirely. Escape, the imperative screamed through her. She began collapsing her camp with a desperate, clumsy haste, each rustle of fabric, each snap of a pole amplified tenfold in the unnatural quiet. Her gaze darted constantly towards the impenetrable woods, the spaces between trees seeming to watch. While bundling her sleeping bag, a foreign object snagged her attention, cold against her knuckles. There, nestled just inside the tent's threshold, lay a small totem, crudely whittled from some pale wood. It hadn't been there before. A frigid certainty gripped her. With unsteady hands, she lifted it, a vaguely humanoid shape, gouged sockets for eyes imparting a vacant, unsettling stare. Turning it, her fingers met a tacky dampness coating the base. She looked closer, revulsion churning deep in her stomach. Dark, viscous, undeniably sanguine. Blood. She flung the effigy away as if it were incandescent, scrambling backward on hands and knees, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This wasn't benign misadventure. This was malice given form. Stealth forgotten, she rammed the remaining gear into her pack with brutal efficiency, hoisted the weight onto trembling shoulders, and plunged into the trees, aiming for the fading memory of the trail that had led her here. The deeper she walked, the more the woods seemed to constrict, the benevolent giants of yesterday transforming into leering sentinels. Shadows writhed with imagined threats. Every sigh of wind carried the whisper of pursuit. She glanced back incessantly, the nape of her neck prickling with unseen attention. Time stretched, elastic and meaningless, until a chilling realization dawned. The terrain was alien. The blazes she'd noted, the The distinctive rock formations vanished. Had she strayed so drastically, or was the wilderness itself actively confounding her path, turning her sanctuary into a maze? Halting, she fumbled for her map and compass, desperate for orientation. Unfolding the worn paper, her stomach plummeted. Scrawled across the familiar topography in rough, hasty charcoal were crude stick figures, mocking parodies of humanity, each bearing the same empty eye sockets as the whittled horror from her tent. And there, pinpointing her presumed location on the map, loomed a larger, solitary figure, seemingly waiting. The map fluttered from her grasp, her hands seized by an uncontrollable tremor. A waking nightmare, hysteria born of fear and isolation. No, the prince, the totem, the defiled map. Their reality was too solid, too malevolent. A sharp crack, like bone snapping, split the air directly behind her. Elara spun, heart leaping into her throat. A fleeting darkness flickered between trunks. A presence glimpsed, then instantly gone. Instinct screamed louder than thought. She fled. She tore through the dense undergrowth, heedless of lashing branches and treacherous roots, propelled only by raw, primal terror. Direction dissolved. Only distance mattered. Her lungs seared, muscles screamed protest, but the fear was a relentless goad, a physical force at her back. Footfalls echoed hers, sometimes distant, sometimes unnervingly close. Phantom steps flanking her in the periphery, always just out of sight, a predatory patience in their rhythm. Just when her body screamed for surrender, she burst abruptly from the suffocating trees into a small, unexpected clearing dominated by a derelict cabin. Its windows were vacant eyes staring into nothing. The door sagged on rusted hinges, slightly ajar. Primal instinct shrieked, trap, urged her to keep moving, to bypass this dubious offering. But exhaustion clawed at her reserves, and the pursuing steps felt closer now, heavier, more deliberate. A gamble. She bolted for the structure, slamming her shoulder into the warped door. It groaned open under the impact. She stumbled inside, wrenched it shut behind her, and frantically scanned the gloom for a means to secure it. A listing solid table stood against one wall. Fueled by pure adrenaline, she wrestled it across the entryway, jamming it against the protesting doorframe. Darkness reigned within, thick with the cloying scent of mildew and ancient decay, pierced only by stray sunbeams illuminating galaxies of swirling dust. As her vision adapted, she saw the floor choked with detritus, splintered wood, faded paper scraps, drifts of leaves, and scattered among them, hideously familiar, more of the unsettling, hollow-eyed figures. She recoiled, searching the oppressive space for an alternative exit, a window, anything. Turning, her foot snagged on something uneven, sending her staggering. Beneath a threadbare, moldering rug lay a trapdoor, flush with the grimy floorboards. Hope warred with a deeper dread. A hiding place, or a deeper snare laid just for her. Decision was wrested from her. Footsteps sounded on the porch planks, slow, measured, impossibly heavy. They halted directly outside the barricaded door. A pregnant pause stretched, taut and agonizing, then shattered by a sound that froze the marrow in her bones. Soft, chilling laughter, low and intimate, followed by a voice that seemed to emanate not from the doorway, but from the very walls around her, whispering directly into her mind. "I've waited, Elara," it rasped, a sibilant invitation slithering through the cracks. "Such things we have to discuss." The door shuddered violently. The barricading table grated and scraped against the floorboards as immense pressure bore down from without. Panic flared, white-hot and blinding. Her eyes darted wildly. Weapon, egress, landing again on the trapdoor. No choice remained. She lunged, tore it open, revealing a black, silent void beneath. The cabin door groaned, wood splintering audibly. With a strangled gasp, a prayer caught silent in her throat. Alara hurled herself into the abyss. The fall seemed endless, a plummet through starless, breathless night. Then, impact, not bone-jarring earth, but yielding softness. Disoriented, Alara blinked her eyes open to the familiar green curve of her tent ceiling, bathed in the warm, innocuous glow of morning sun. Outside, impossibly, birds trilled their customary intricate chorus. She sat bolt upright, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, gaze sweeping the small space. Everything pristine. No muddied earth outside, no disturbed pack, no sinister map, no carved effigies littering the ground. A dream. Had the isolation and stress conspired to conjure such elaborate, terrifying phantoms from the ether of her exhausted mind? Oh, how desperately she craved that simple, rational explanation. But as she reached for the zipper, ready to flee into the suddenly benign-seeming day, her fingers closed around something small, solid, nestled deep within the synthetic folds of her sleeping bag. She drew it out into the trembling light, a diminutive wooden figure, identical to the others, rough-hewn and potent. Its vacant eyes seemed to fix on hers and carried on the gentle morning breeze rustling the canvas. She thought she discerned the faint, receding echo of distant, knowing laughter. Camp was struck in a blur of panicked efficiency. Within minutes, Alara was moving, practically running, back towards the direction civilization theoretically lay, the rising sun warm on her back, offering no comfort. Reality blurred at the edges, dream and waking indistinguishable, terrifyingly porous. What nameless terror had stalked her through the trees? What presence lingered still, watching from the shadows? She couldn't know, perhaps would never know. But one truth resonated with the chilling clarity of absolute certainty. The deep woods and the profound solitude she had once so desperately craved held teeth she would never again dare to bear alone. I recall, with chilling precision, the morning my neighbor erupted from his apartment, propelled by an urgency that suggested the world itself might end if he tarried. The concussion of his door slamming vibrated through the thin walls. Tucked beneath one arm, a small leather satchel, splashed across his shirt and tattooing his forearms, the indelible marks of his trade, dried pigments in umber and ochre. From my own threshold, I watched. No glance acknowledged my presence. No parting words softened his abrupt flight. He simply vanished down the corridor, his footfalls a fading drumbeat against the weary tiles. After that morning, Silas was gone. My name is Leo. I inhabit a modest space on the 5th floor of a building whose bones creak and settle on windy nights, a skeletal structure groaning under the wind's assault. Utilities are fickle companions here. Power flickers, water runs glacial, but the rent is a kindness, and familiarity breeds acceptance. The neighbor, Silas, though I never once heard the name pass his own lips, had resided next door for perhaps 8 months. Communication was sparse, a curt nod in the hallway sometimes. More often, his gaze remained fixed on the floorboards as he scurried past. His vocation was an open secret, Glimpses caught near the tarnished mailboxes revealed canvases under wraps, bundles of new brushes. An artist, undoubtedly. He never extended an invitation, and I never presumed to ask. His life was his own canvas, yet a persistent curiosity gnawed at me. He moved with the quiet intensity of someone perceiving dimensions hidden from the rest of us, his clothes perpetually adorned with spatters of paint or charcoal dust, worn like badges he scarcely noticed. So, when that frantic departure stretched into an enduring absence, a tremor of unease disturbed my routine. A day, then two, I rationalized. Perhaps a sudden trip, an exhibition demanding his presence. But Silas never materialized, and his door, I discovered with a jolt, remained unlatched. A silent invitation or a sign of distress? It clung to my thoughts, an unresolved chord. A few nights later, a sliver of light drew my eye. The building's eccentric geometry grants my living room window a partial oblique view into his apartment, contingent on the curtains. That night, they hung half-drawn. Dominating the visible space, perched on an easel, stood a canvas far larger than any I'd seen him wrestle through the halls. Unfinished, yet potent. The colors swam in nocturnal hues. Squinting, I discerned a form, vaguely human, cloaked or hooded, stark against a bruised night sky. A prickle of transgression crawled over my skin, the feeling of peering into a fiercely guarded sanctum. The following morning, passing his door, I hesitated. The brass knob felt cold beneath my hovering palm. My heart kicked against my ribs, a frantic bird. Concern, I told myself. Simple, neighborly concern. What if he'd met with misfortune? Injured? Lost? I pushed the door inward. The air hung thick with the ghosts of turpentine and oil paint. Silence reigned. The apartment was empty. It was an ordinary dwelling, made extraordinary by the makeshift studio consuming the main room. Drop cloths lay like fallen shrouds. Tubes of paint, squeezed and exhausted, littered surfaces alongside soiled brushes. A wooden stand held depleted bottles of linseed oil and a pair of sketchbooks. And there, commanding the space, the immense canvas. A tenebrous forest at midnight unfurled across it, centered by the solitary figure in its hooded cloak, positioned near a skeletal tree. It seemed to lean forward, yet the hood's deep cowl concealed any face, offering only shadow. The canvas edges remained stark white, the figure's lower extremities and hands dissolving into ambiguity. Deep blues and profound blacks dominated the background, applied with thick, agitated strokes, suggesting haste or immense pressure. On a nearby palette, colors glistened, still wet. Brushes lay scattered as if dropped mid-thought. I touched the bristles of one, damp, slick with pigment. A disquiet settled deep within me. Why abandon such a significant work? It possessed the aura of a magnum opus, yet here it lay, forsaken. I searched for clues. The small kitchen held unwashed plates, mugs bearing coffee rings. The bathroom was unremarkable, the light off. His bedroom door stood ajar, revealing little. A naked mattress, a heap of clothes, a lone lamp casting long shadows from the floor. Drawn back to the living room, I stood before the painting again. My pulse thrummed in my ears. My own breathing sounded unnaturally loud. The hooded figure, eyeless though it was, seemed to fix its attention upon me. Tentatively, my fingertips brushed the canvas corner. The paint yielded, sticky, leaving a smear of midnight blue on my skin. I retreated, pulling the door shut, engaging the inside lock. The act felt intrusive, illicit, yet the thought of someone else stumbling in was worse. I pocketed the key, promising myself I'd safeguard it until Silas's return. That evening, dinner was a solitary, tasteless affair. An old action film flickered on the television, a feeble bulwark against encroaching thoughts of the painting, the hooded enigma. A constriction tightened in my chest. Overreaction, surely. But close to midnight, as I extinguished my lamps, a faint luminescence bloomed next door. I froze. The light emanated from Silas's apartment, a soft, singular glow. Had he returned? Silently? Why avoid me? Peering through my window, the angle restricting my view, I could see only a segment of his living room, but the easel was clearly visible, bathed in that soft light. I watched, heart accelerating, breath held captive. Then, a sound reached me, faint but distinct, the whisper of bristles across canvas. Scrape, pause, scrape. A rhythm, soft yet insistent. Sweat beaded on my brow. I murmured his name, a useless whisper swallowed by the glass between us. The sound persisted for another minute or two, methodical, deliberate. Then, abruptly, the light winked out. The next morning, wrestling with disbelief, I convinced myself it was fatigue, imagination. Yet, the compulsion to verify was undeniable. The key, heavy with guilt in my hand, turned the lock. I slipped inside. At first glance, everything seemed unchanged. But approaching the easel, my stomach plummeted. The figure in the painting had changed. Nuances of shadow now gathered beneath the hood, hinting at contours where a face should be, though still profoundly hidden. The barren tree behind it boasted new, spindly branches, extensions that hadn't existed yesterday. I rubbed my eyes, the impossible reality settling in. The paint smelled pungently fresh, linseed oil and raw pigment stinging my nostrils. New streaks of color, vibrant against the older layers, attested to recent work. Yet, the apartment bore no trace of entry. No footprints disturbed the dust. For several nights, the phenomenon repeated. The spectral light, the rhythmic brushing. It commenced at unpredictable hours, sometimes 10, sometimes closer to 2. Each occurrence sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, rooting me to the spot. My gut clenched. A cold sweat slicked my skin. I'd stare through the window, a captive audience, until the light inevitably died. Sleep became a fragile refuge, easily shattered. My eyes would snap open at the floorboards groan, the sigh of the wind. A persistent fatigue settled in my limbs, my stomach churning at the mere thought of that evolving canvas. On the 5th night, I resolved to keep vigil, determined to witness whatever entity haunted Silas's apartment. Huddled in my darkened living room, I trained my gaze on the window. Around midnight, the light flickered on. A silhouette materialized, indistinct but undeniably present, standing before the easel. Tall, leaning into the work. The familiar cadence of the brush resumed, steady, focused. My heart hammered against my ribs. My palms grew damp. A desperate urge to confront it warred with a paralyzing fear that welded my feet to the floor. I watched, trapped in my own terror. After several minutes, the silhouette paused, seeming to turn, to orient itself towards my window. I held my breath, anticipating nothing. The light extinguished. The presence vanished. Morning found me forcing my legs toward the neighboring door, dread a physical weight. Inside, the painting assaulted my senses. It was different. Again. The figure now possessed eyes, or rather, 2 circles of dull, reflective paint that seemed to gleam under the room's overhead light. They followed me as I moved. The cloak's folds were sharper, more defined. I ran a trembling hand over the surface. Patches were undeniably wet. Standing there, shaking slightly, I tried to assemble the fragments into a coherent explanation. No Silas. His belongings lay undisturbed. Only the painting pulsed with this unnatural life. The discomfort had curdled into genuine fear. My chest felt banded. Swallowing became difficult. I fled the apartment, locking it behind me, the key feeling like stolen property. The day passed in a haze. I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts snagged perpetually on that canvas, the wet paint, those nascent eyes. I sought refuge in a cafe, the mundane chatter of strangers and alien soundscape against my internal turmoil. That night, I decided documentation was necessary. My phone, perched on a small tripod, aimed squarely at Silas's window. I sat in the darkness, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, waiting. Around 1 a.m., the familiar glow ignited. The shadowy form resumed its work. I zoomed in, but the image remained frustratingly blurred, a mere smudge of movement against the dim light. My body went rigid. A slow, crawling sensation prickled the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being observed. 10 minutes, the spectral artist worked. Then darkness. I scrambled to check the recording. Futile. Darkness, a flicker, an indistinct shape, more digital noise than evidence. Frustration bloomed into a deeper dread. Replaying it yielded nothing. A momentary surge of courage urged me to go over now, but fear, cold and absolute, clamped down. Sweat trickled down my temples. My breath came in ragged gasps. Facing whatever resided there alone was unthinkable. Sunrise was my reluctant cue. Key in hand, I crossed the threshold once more. Before the painting, my stomach clenched violently. The hooded figure neared verisimilitude. The cloak's texture was palpable, its folds catching non-existent light. The eyes, more defined now, held a faint, wet glimmer, disturbingly alive. Subtle details had emerged on the hands. Long fingers, slightly curled, though still partially merging with the umbral background. The tree's branches twisted in grotesque, unnatural angles that induced a faint nausea. A floorboard creaked somewhere behind me. I spun, heart leaping into my throat. Empty. I touched the canvas. Wet again. My fingers came away stained with a dark pigment, black or deepest violet. Fresh brush marks marred the easel's wooden frame. My pulse roared in my ears. Action was imperative. This couldn't continue. Seizing a dusty sheet from the couch, I flung it over the painting, shrouding the image. A small, irrational wave of relief washed over me. Containing it, perhaps. I forced myself to breathe deeply, evenly. Back in my own apartment, the relief proved fleeting. That night, the light returned, brighter than before, as if every lamp had been switched on. The sound was louder too, urgent, forceful strokes, a frantic energy replacing the previous calm. Through the window, I saw the sheet crumpled on the floor. The painting stood exposed. I paced my living room, shoulders bunched, feet restless. Call the police. Report what? A spectral artist? A haunted canvas? The absurdity paralyzed me. I sat, fists clenched, waiting. When I next dared to look, the light was gone. Dawn arrived, finding me sleepless. I returned, dread coiling in my gut. The painting, unveiled, now displayed the clear structure of a face beneath the hood. No distinct features, no nose, no mouth, but the skin tones were there, shading across cheekbones and brow. The eyes looked wide, fixed on some unseen horror. their glossy finish unnervingly catching the morning light. My throat constricted. Destroy it? Hide it in the building's cavernous basement? The thought surfaced, only to be drowned by a wave of nausea. The building's strict rules on disposal seemed insurmountable, but deeper still was the visceral fear of handling that canvas, of interfering directly. My limbs felt heavy, my head swam. Now, even daylight offers no respite. Faint sounds bleed through the walls, the tap of a brush, the whisper of movement on drop cloths. Each noise arrests me, sends my heart into a frantic rhythm. I listen, strain to identify the source, find nothing. Paranoia sinks its roots deeper. I've stopped going to work, fabricating excuses my boss clearly disbelieves. My apartment has become an observation post, my life reduced to watching the adjacent window. Sometimes the light flashes momentarily. Sometimes I glimpse the shape within, always near the easel. The painting accrues detail relentlessly. The hood boasts a newly materialized silver trim. The hands achieve an unsettling realism. The tree bark shows intricate texture, and the background evolves, hinting at distant, ambiguous lights, perhaps stars. I find myself drawn back to it, standing before the canvas, chest tight, breath shallow, mesmerized by its terrifying growth. My deepest fear crystallizes, its completion. A creeping certainty tells me that the final stroke will not signify an end, but a beginning. That something will step out of the pigment and oil, or manifest within the confines of that room. There's no poetry in this premonition, just a cold physical dread that tightens my muscles, dries my mouth, throbs behind my eyes. I am writing this now at my small kitchen table, committing it to paper before attempting to type, my hands trembling too much for the keyboard. I need the grounding act of forming letters. Every few minutes, my gaze drifts to the living room window. Silas's apartment is dark for now, but I wait for the glow. My stomach is a tight, cold knot. Sweat chills my skin despite the cool air. If that painted face gains its final features, I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I can remain here. I no longer wish for Silas's return. That possibility now seems as terrifying as his absence. I only crave silence, stillness, an image forever unfinished. Because the alternative, the crawling fear that something far worse is taking shape next door, threatens to consume me. So I wait. I watch. Terrified for the night the painting completes itself, unable to look away, unable to leave.